So, welcome to today's deep dive. And I want you to start by just imagining something for a second. Imagine having a trust fund that pays you the inflation-adjusted equivalent of about $72,000 a year for life.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's the dream, right?
Yeah.
Total financial security.
Exactly. You literally never have to work a single day in your life.
Yeah.
You've got that absolute freedom where most people, they claim they'd use it to finally write that novel or travel the world.
Or start a charity or something. Yeah.
Right. But if you're a man named Stephen Cary Blumberg, born in 1948, you take a completely different path.
A very different path.
Yeah, you spend decades meticulously orchestrating the largest private theft of rare books in United States history.
It is such a wild story because, he didn't just smash windows and grab what he could. Bloomberg operated with this level of extreme intelligence and patience that honestly rivals top-tier corporate strategy. He spent hours studying intricate library floor plans. He crawled through ventilation shafts in the dead of night. He even forged complex academic credentials just to get access to restricted vaults.
Which is insane.
Right. And over 20 years, he systematically stole more than 23,600 rare books and manuscripts across 45 states and 2 Canadian provinces.
Unbelievable, man.
We are talking about an archive valued today at nearly $13 million.
And for me, the truly fascinating part is the aftermath. Because when the FBI finally raided his sprawling Victorian house in Iowa, they didn't bust a criminal fencing operation.
No, he wasn't selling these books for profit.
Exactly. They walked into a climate-controlled, floor-to-ceiling private museum. Blumberg had carefully organized the collection, even taking the time to painstakingly repair damaged bindings.
Yeah, in his own mind, he wasn't a thief at all.
He thought he was a rescuer, liberating history from negligent bureaucrats.
And it really forces us to confront a highly uncomfortable reality about how success is actually generated. Because the specific traits that made Bloomberg a master thief, his strategic long-term thinking, his singular obsession, his patience, and his logistical brilliance, well, those are the exact same traits required to build massive legitimate institutions. The underlying capability is identical. It's just the direction that differs.
Which is such a perfect hook. And that story is actually the opening hook of the manual we are unpacking today for you. It's called Lessons from 100 Books, The Complete Entrepreneurial Blueprint by Alen Brbutovic.
It's a heavy hitter.
It really is. And the mission of our deep dives today is to strip away all those comforting fairy tale myths about success. We're going to map out the hidden mechanics of power and really extract a real operational blueprint for building systems that give you actual leverage in life and business.
Yeah, because the author uses Bloomberg to immediately shatter this illusion of a moral meritocracy.
Right, the idea that the world automatically rewards goodness. It doesn't. It rewards strategy and leverage.
Which is exactly why the text then pivots into dissecting some of the darkest, most manipulative systems of control imaginable. Like, it examines Robert Beck, who is much better known as Iceberg Slim, and his 1967 memoir, Pimp.
Yeah, which at first glance, including a street hustler's memoir in an entrepreneurial blueprint, seems completely absurd.
Totally. But the author strips away the criminality to reveal this brutal, highly effective field manual on psychological domination. Slim didn't rely on physical force. He relied on a structured psychological process.
And the mechanics of it are genuinely chilling. It's a formula. First, you identify a deep, unmet vulnerability in a target.
Right, find the weak spot.
Then you apply a massive, overwhelming dose of exaggerated affection to fill that void and manufacture trust. And once that trust is solidified, the next step is systematically isolating the person from their friends, family, and any external support systems.
And the end result of that is total dependency, which equals absolute control.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
But this isn't just an artifact of 1960s street crime.
No, not at all. The underlying mechanism is universal. The manual highlights how comedian Dave Chappelle explicitly cited the lessons from that exact book to recognize his own situation within the corporate entertainment industry.
Oh, wow. Really? I didn't know he cited that specifically.
Yeah. When he was offered that famous $50 million contract to continue his television show, he didn't see a reward. He saw the exact psychological framework of extraction that Slim described.
That is wild.
Chappelle realized he was being exploited by a system designed to extract massive value from his unique creativity, while they maintained total structural control over his output. So he walked away from $50 million because he finally understood the board he was playing on.
That's incredible. And that kind of structural manipulation, it scales all the way up at the societal level. The manual connects these intimate psychological tactics to the grand-scale engineering of Edward Bernays.
Oh, the father of public relations.
Exactly. The guy who basically invented modern PR in the 1920s. Bernays understood a foundational flaw in human processing, which is you do not persuade the masses with logic.
Right. You engineer their behavior by hijacking emotional symbolism.
And the quintessential example the text uses is the Torches of Freedom campaign.
Such a classic example.
So in the 1920s, tobacco companies faced a massive ceiling on their revenue because social taboo prevented women from smoking in public.
And Bernays was hired to break that taboo.
Right. But he didn't run ads talking about the flavor or the price of the cigarettes. Instead, he hired a group of women to march in the Easter Sunday parade in New York, and they dramatically lit cigarettes at a coordinated moment.
Such a calculated spectacle.
Totally. And he explicitly branded the cigarettes to the press as Torches of Freedom. He inextricably linked the product to the booming women's liberation movement.
And the product itself didn't change at all. A cigarette was still a cigarette. But the narrative shifted entirely. Suddenly, smoking wasn't a dirty habit. It was a public declaration of independence. Sales absolutely exploded.
And the crazy part is, we still see these exact same mechanics governing the systems we consider prestigious today. Like take the New York Times bestseller list.
Oh, man. The ultimate objective cultural scoreboard.
Right? That's how it's viewed. Yet the methodology behind it is routinely and legally manipulated.
Yeah, the list isn't a pure aggregate of all books sold everywhere. It relies on a curated, secretive sample of specific reporting bookstores.
So if you have enough capital and you understand the system, you don't just hope people buy your book. You orchestrate a campaign of bulk buying, strategically routing purchases through those specific reporting stores to trigger the algorithm.
And the Times even knows this happens. That's the best part. They put a little dagger symbol next to titles to indicate suspicious institutional bulk purchases.
But the book still gets the ranking.
Exactly. The author still gets to put New York Times bestseller on their resume forever. And the text points out that this tactic spans the entire political and cultural spectrum. It's used by megachurch pastors, corporate executives, politicians.
The system ultimately rewards strategic purchasing power and a knowledge of the invisible tripwires, not necessarily literary merit.
Right. And the author strings together Bloomberg, Iceberg Slim, Bernays, and the publishing industry to really force you, the listener, to confront how structures that appear fair and objective from the outside frequently contain hidden mechanisms. These mechanisms disproportionately reward those who understand how to pull the levers behind the curtain.
Okay, I have to admit, though, reading through this first section, it feels incredibly cynical. I mean, it almost reads like a sociopath's guide to getting ahead.
I can definitely see how it comes across that way.
Wait, so does this mean the author is telling you to just abandon your ethics and become a ruthless manipulator to succeed?
No, the author is actually very careful to separate observation from endorsement. Pointing out how a rigged game works is not the same as telling you to rig it.
Okay, that makes sense.
The text is holding up a mirror to a reality most people really want to ignore, which is that influence will consistently beat integrity if your integrity is blind to how the system actually operates.
Ah, I see.
You have to understand the mechanics of power and manipulation so you can spot when they are being used against you. Because if you don't understand the rules of the game, you are simply a resource for someone who does.
Wow. Yeah, you have to see the board. And the author maps out this board perfectly with the pyramid of ownership and control.
Yes, this is a crucial concept.
If you want to understand where you fit into these hidden systems, you have to look at the structural hierarchy of society.
Right. So at the absolute peak of this pyramid, you have the top 0.01%. The text defines them as the owners.
And these aren't the famous tech billionaires we see everywhere, right?
No, exactly. These aren't necessarily the highly visible billionaires doing podcast interviews. We are talking about multi-generational dynasties and silent capital allocators who own the fundamental flows of society.
The central banking infrastructure, global shipping routes?
Major energy grids, exactly. They operate with extreme discretion. Their power is structural. It comes from pure ownership and capital allocation, never from a W-2 salary.
And right below them is the 0.1%, labeled the high priests.
The gatekeepers.
Yeah, the gatekeepers of truth and narrative.
Yeah.
You find your media moguls here, your elite academic institutions, and the tech executives who write the algorithms governing what information is visible.
They control the Overton window, right?
Yeah.
The parameters of what is considered acceptable public discourse.
Exactly. By defining the boundaries of the debate, they basically dictate reality for everyone below them.
They essentially act as a buffer layer. And then moving down, we hit the 1%, the executive elite. This is where you find your visible focal points of power.
Presidents, senators, Fortune 500 CEOs.
Right. Their power is massive. But the text makes a crucial distinction here. Their power is delegated and temporary.
Because a politician can be voted out.
And a CEO can be ousted by a board of directors. They manage the heavy machinery, but they do not own the factory.
Which brings us to the layer where, honestly, a huge portion of ambitious people find themselves or desperately aspire to be, the 10 to 15%, the professional class.
Yeah, and this layer is fascinating because it is a psychological trap.
It really is. These are your highly trained specialists, neurosurgeons, corporate lawyers, senior software engineers. You make a fantastic living, you have high societal status, and you feel successful.
But fundamentally, you are still just trading your time for money.
Exactly. And you are tightly bound to the system through debt and lifestyle inflation. The massive mortgage, the private school tuition, the student loans.
You maintain the operational engine of the pyramid, and your intense fear of losing that hard-won high status keeps you incredibly obedient to the layers above you.
And below this, of course, is the vast administrative layer and the working base, who execute the physical and routine labor that sustains the entire structure.
So the core thesis hitting you here is profound. A lot of what we stress about, daily politics, corporate ladder climbing, it's essentially theater occurring in the middle layers.
Right.
Real tectonic shifts happen in boardrooms through monetary policy and via pure ownership.
But the immediate, actionable takeaway for your own life strategy is this. A salary has a ceiling. It doesn't matter how prestigious your title is in that professional class.
Exactly.
If you remain in the middle, you are selling the finite hours of your life, operating entirely within frameworks and rules chosen by someone else. Escaping the bottom means moving your energy away from execution and toward leverage and ownership.
But the obvious question then becomes the how.
Right. Okay. So if the goal is to stop trading time for money and start building leverage, how do you actually do that? Do you need to read every business book ever written?
No, and that's exactly what the author calls the myth of 100 books. He directly challenges the modern hustle culture assumption that hoarding information equals gaining leverage.
Oh, I love this part.
Reading 100 business books is completely useless if it remains an intellectual exercise. A person who deeply internalizes and applies 5 core ideas will radically outperform someone who casually speed reads 100 books just to say they did.
Yeah, I look at it like downloading 100 different productivity apps onto your phone, cluttering your screen, but never actually opening them.
That's a great analogy.
What you really need is to just upgrade the base operating system of your brain. And the text distills the vast, noisy curriculum of modern entrepreneurship down to 12 core principles.
Right. It covers the mechanics of solving real problems, building automated systems instead of relying on your own heroic late-night efforts, and mastering distribution.
But it insists that every single one of these structural changes has to start with the foundation of the founder's psychology.
Absolutely. Building leverage requires managing your own mind before you can manage a market. Drawing on the mechanics detailed in works like Atomic Habits and Mindset, the author explains that long-term leverage isn't built through massive, exhausting bursts of motivation. It is built through identity shifts. You don't set a goal to, build $1 million company. You adopt the identity of a system builder.
You make the micro choices automatic. A person with a fixed mindset views effort as a sign of weakness. They think if they have to try hard, it means they lack natural talent, and failure becomes a permanent stain on their identity.
Which is paralyzing.
Completely. A growth mindset fundamentally alters that mechanism. Effort becomes the actual vehicle for mastery. A failed product launch isn't a reflection of your worth, it's simply a data point required for the next iteration.
But, and this is a big but, an optimized, resilient mindset paired with a terrible idea is still going to drive you straight into a wall.
Oh, yeah.
You have to validate reality. This introduces one of the most common ways early system builders sabotage themselves, which is the echo chamber of false praise.
The mom tests.
Yes, exactly. The manual zeroes in on the classic mom test problem.
I've lived this exact trap. I used to think if I built something elegant, I just had to show it to my friends or colleagues. I'd ask, hey, would you use this app?
And what would they say?
They'd cheer me on, tell me it was brilliant, and then crickets. Nobody actually downloaded it.
Because human beings are inherently wired to avoid social friction. If you ask someone a leading question about the future, like, do you like this idea, or would you buy this someday, they will almost always lie to you to protect your feelings.
They just want to be nice.
Right. Furthermore, humans are terrible at predicting their own future behavior. If you want the unvarnished truth about whether you have a viable foundation for leverage, you can only look at past behavior.
You have to ask, show me the budget you've already spent trying to fix this problem.
Yes. Or show me the messy spreadsheet you cobbled together last week because a software solution doesn't exist.
Because if they aren't already spending time or money hacking together a solution, the problem simply isn't painful enough to build a business around.
And this is the core mechanism of validated learning, which is often associated with lean startup methodologies.
Right. The idea that in the early days, your primary job is not to sell a product.
And it certainly isn't to build a flawless, feature-complete final version. Your job is to construct a minimum viable product specifically designed to test a core hypothesis about customer behavior. You are basically buying data with your effort.
And once you validate that data, you hit another massive structural wall.
The chasm.
Exactly. The manual explores the psychological gap, the chasm between early adopters and the early majority. The mechanics of selling to these two groups are entirely opposed.
Right, because early adopters are buying into your vision. They want to be first. They will happily tolerate a buggy interface or a clunky onboarding process because the novelty is part of the appeal.
But the early majority, they do not care about your grand vision.
Not at all. They are entirely pragmatic. They want a proven, reliable solution to an immediate problem.
So if you try to cross that chasm by marketing to the early majority using the same disruptive, visionary language that hooked your early adopters, you will fail.
The early majority requires case studies, peer references, and a sense of institutional stability. You have to completely overhaul your narrative to capture that leverage.
But shouldn't a great product just sell itself? I mean, I always used to harbor this romantic notion of the build it and they will come myth.
Most people do.
The idea that if you simply build the absolute best mousetrap, the sheer quality of the product will organically attract the world to your door.
Well, the author rips that idea to shreds. Drawing on books like 0 to 1 and Contagious, the text proves that a phenomenal product without a distribution mechanism is entirely invisible.
It's harsh but true.
You have to engineer distribution into the DNA of the product itself. You don't try to boil the ocean, you establish a micromonopoly. You dominate a tiny, highly specific niche market before expanding outward, and you leverage the mechanics of social currency.
Meaning, people share things that elevate their own status.
Exactly.
They talk about products that make them look smart, wealthy, or in the know to their peer group. If your product does not naturally enhance the social standing of the person using it, it will never go viral.
You have to design the product so that the act of using it is simultaneously an act of marketing it.
Okay, so let's say you execute all this perfectly. You validate the problem, you engineer the social currency, you cross the chasm, and demand explodes. You have successfully created leverage.
Congratulations.
Right. But suddenly, you find yourself drowning in the very success you engineered.
It is the ultimate irony of entrepreneurship. You work relentlessly to escape the professional class and stop trading time for money, only to accidentally build yourself the most stressful 24/7 job on the planet.
The manual identifies this as the technician trap, from the E-Myth Revisited.
Yeah, you are a brilliant programmer, so you start a software agency. But writing brilliant code has absolutely nothing to do with knowing how to run a business that sells code.
You become the bottleneck for your own creation.
And the structural solution requires another profound identity shift. You must transition from working in the business to working on the business.
You have to design the operation as if it were a franchise prototype. Even if you have zero intention of ever franchising, every single process must be documented, systematized, and repeatable.
Because the ultimate test of leverage is whether the system functions flawlessly and grows when the founder is completely removed from the daily operations.
But a system is still run by human beings, and human beings are inherently messy. You cannot simply document a team into high performance.
No, you can't. Which brings us to the messy human element of scaling and the crucial mechanics of leadership.
Right. The manual leans into the concept of extreme ownership here. The philosophy is brutal but clarifying. There are no bad teams, only bad leaders.
The leader must take 100% accountability for every outcome.
If a project fails, You don't blame the junior developer. You recognize that you either failed to train them, failed to explain the parameters clearly, or failed to provide the necessary resources.
But that level of intense accountability only works if it is paired with deep psychological safety.
Yes, that's such an important nuance.
The author balances this military-style ownership with the mechanics of radical candor and leaders eat last, because taking extreme ownership does not give you license to be a tyrant.
No, a leader's primary structural role is to create a circle of safety around the team.
When employees feel shielded from internal political backstabbing and the constant fear of arbitrary firing, their energy naturally shifts from self-preservation to external innovation.
And the framework for communicating within that circle of safety requires the intersection of caring personally and challenging directly.
Right, because honesty without empathy is cruelty. If you deliver blunt, unfiltered feedback to someone, but you have not established that you genuinely care about their well-being, that isn't leadership.
It's just obnoxious aggression. It breeds resentment.
But the inverse is equally destructive. If you care so much about someone's feelings that you perpetually avoid having the uncomfortable conversation about their underperformance, you are practicing ruinous empathy.
Empathy without honesty sabotages growth. You are actively hurting their potential just to spare yourself temporary social discomfort.
True management leverage is defined as increasing the output of your entire team. You are no longer the hero executing the tasks. You are the architect of a system that continuously produces knowledge, makes decisions, and executes autonomously.
Man, what a dense, revealing journey this has been. I mean, we started by peeling back the curtain on the murky mechanics of how power and manipulation actually operate.
From art thieves to rigged cultural scoreboards.
Exactly. We mapped out the pyramid of ownership and control, recognizing that the comfort of the professional class is often just a gilded cage that keeps you trading time for a high-status ceiling.
Then we looked at how to get out.
Right. Upgrading your mental operating system, breaking out of the echo chamber of false praise by tracking past behavior, and designing products with built-in social currency.
And finally, making that transition from an exhausted technician drowning in tasks to an architect working on the business, using extreme ownership and radical candor to build a self-sustaining machine.
This deep dive isn't just a review of a text. It is an operational framework for anyone who refuses to remain a pawn on the board.
It really is. And, it leaves you with a final lingering thought experiment to mull over. It's actually drawn from a tension within the source text itself.
Oh, right. The contrast between the beginning and the end.
Exactly. Early on, the author notes that in the grand game of power, influence beats integrity. Ethics are optional.
Right. The iceberg Slim and Bernays stuff.
But later, when analyzing the greatest companies, the text states, culture is how we behave when no one is watching, and warns that results never excuse toxic behavior.
So it asks a bigger question.
It does. It challenges you, the listener, to ponder, now that you have the blueprint to build a highly effective, scalable system of leverage, what kind of culture will you choose to embed in its foundation? Will you build a system that merely extracts or one that elevates?